Hello, everyone, and welcome to Writing Trans Characters. I'm so excited to see you all here. Before we get started, there's just a little bit of housekeeping to do. First off, this event is run by Weeknight Writers, which is an organization that I founded, which is dedicated to providing affordable and accessible support for authors, primarily through virtual events and community. And we are hosting this event in partnership with Renaissance Press, who has given us the ability to have live captions on Zoom for all of our panels. They are a lovely Canadian publisher dedicated to uplifting marginalized voices, and I strongly recommend checking them out. As I mentioned right before we jumped in, visitors, viewers, audience members are not actually given permissions to record video or audio. If you want to ask a question, there will be time for audience questions. So please just ask them in the chat and make sure that you put the word question in caps locks at the beginning of your questions so that we will know to look for it. Jade will be keeping an eye out for those. And be sure to check out the Weeknight Writers and Renaissance Press websites, and also to check out our wonderful panelists. Who wants to introduce themselves? Does anyone want to volunteer, or do I have to pick on someone?
I can volunteer.
All
Hi.
right, introduce your name, pronouns, and why you wanted to be on this panel.
Hi, my name is Vela Dinar. My pronouns are she, they, and the occasional he, him. And I wanted to be on this panel because when I started writing, I made mistakes that were annoying, if not harmful. And, I could have prevented those if I'd just known a little bit more. So I wanted to share a little bit of my know-how.
Awesome. Who wants to go next?
I could take and go. My name is Kara Jorgensen. My pronouns are they, them. I think part of the reason why I wanted to be on this panel is I currently live in the US. And with our political climate, I think seeing trans people as complex individuals is especially important right now. And to see trans characters portrayed in nuanced ways, not just as wholly good or wholly evil, but sort of everything in between, I think is especially important right now. And, we're not tropes. We're not, words on an executive order. We're real people. So I feel like having this discussion right now is incredibly timely.
Awesome.
I can go next. Mhm. Hello, my name is Felix Graves. I use he, him pronouns. I was really excited to hear about this panel and even more pleased to be invited because it shows to me that there are more writers and authors interested in creating trans characters respectfully and thoughtfully. Just like Kara, I live in the US for the last several years. It has felt very unwelcoming and hateful toward trans, non-binary, and cisgender folks. So knowing that there are people who want to push back against that in their stories feels like a really great step in a better direction.
Georgina, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I didn't know if I should go.
No worries.
Hi, my name is Georgina Kirsten. I am a Black LGBTQ plus romance writer. I primarily write bi and trans people. Um, I write not cozy romances as Georgina Kirsten, and then I have pivoted lately into writing dark paranormal and dark contemporary romance. Um, my pronouns are they, them. And the reason I wanted to be here is because I wanted to connect with other trans authors, because that just makes me smile every time I see another trans author doing well into the world and getting into this space, because publishing can be really uncomfortable for trans people, especially lately. And so I am very excited to see people who want to celebrate trans authors, but also who want to write trans characters well. So that's why I'm here.
Awesome. And Jade, do you want to give yourself a quick intro as well?
Sure. My name is Jade. I am the co-organizer with Diana of Weeknight Writers and this event. And I'm mostly an editor, so I'm really interested in hearing about how trans people want their story structured because with the number of manuscripts that I come across, I am really interested in how to cultivate better representation of the trans community in my work.
Awesome. And as I mentioned, Jade will be watching the chat for questions, so feel free to ask questions. We will get to those in the second hour of the panel. And we'll probably have the full hour for questions. We might only have, 45 minutes because we've got a lot of great questions to start with. But we'll do our best to get as many audience questions answered as possible. And in the interest of doing that, let's just jump into our first question. And I thought I would start the panel on a high note by asking, what is one of your favorite trans stories, or who is one of your favorite trans characters, and why do you love this story or character? And if you can link to the books in the chat, that would be great. And also, if you want to recommend your own work, I'm totally here for it.
Feel free.
I'm going to pick on Kara to start us off.
Okay. So one of my favorite trans authors actually is Anna Marie McLemore. So if you haven't read any of their books, I would suggest starting with When the Moon Was Ours, which is, I think, one of the first books I read that had a trans main character in it that I just absolutely loved. Um, it's a trans man in the story, and there's magic and pumpkins and growth, and it's just fantastic. And all of Anna Marie McLemore's books tend to sort of fall in line with that. For me in particular, a lot of their stories also involve neurodivergent characters, and that means a lot to me as sort of a trans autistic person. So, um, I highly recommend their work. If I have to plug my own stuff, I would just say check out Kinship and Kindness, which has a trans fox shifter who's starting a union to get more rights for non-wolf shifters. So if you're looking for some trans books, especially right now with unionizing and stuff, it's very timely. And it's set in the 1890s. So a lot of parallels between right now.
All right, Georgina, you look eager to get going.
Couldn't help but just celebrate Kara. I love her so. I love them so much. I don't know where that spare pronoun went to. I'm sorry, Kara. Um, my favorite trans character and story is not a book like a traditional book. It's not a traditional book, but it is a comic book, and it's called The Invisibles. And they have a trans Mexican, no, just Mexican witch, a bruja, and their name is Lord Fanny. And Lord Fanny is just outrageously them, like authentically outrageously them. And they are not only, trans and a witch, but they are also, just badass. Like they kick ass all the time. And so I really, truly fell in love with trans characters by reading this comic. I think it's a vertical comic by Grant Morrison. It's not by a trans author, which, I usually don't typically like a lot of works by cis people, but I really love this particular character. And it's a character that has stayed with me for over a decade or so. So
That is amazing. Felix?
Yeah, so this is gonna sound maybe a bit self-indulgent. My favorite trans character is one that I have written. His name is Inyago. He is one of the three POV characters in my upcoming novel, The Killing Song. And I love Inyago because he is the very first trans masculine character I've ever written. Um, and I feel like that was a big step for me. It's been a long journey for me to accept that not only was I trans masculine, but I am also a trans man. There's a lot of, patriarchy and misogyny and everything to unpack there for me to get into fully my identity. So, allowing myself the space to write a trans man character was it's been so cathartic and healing. I poured a lot of myself into him, the gender dysphoria, the gender euphoria, the fear and anxiety associated with being a trans man, the reality of trying to be stealth while also trying to like be authentic to myself and trying to date and find love. So yeah, he's my favorite trans character. Other recommendations, though, from other trans authors, I am obsessed with the Angels trilogy by Rafael Nicolas. Um, Rafa is a trans masc author he's currently in the middle of writing a trilogy that is a queer retelling of big traumatic events in the Bible. So there's the first one is Angels Before Man. It chronicalizes the fall of Satan, and Lucifer is a trans angel. They're all trans. All the angels are trans, and it's just a very, I think, unique way to portray queer trauma and religious trauma through a like pretty biblically accurate retelling. So yeah, that's first book, Angels Before Man. Second book is Angels and Man. Third book is coming out soon.
How biblically accurate? Do they have the right number of eyes?
They do sometimes. They do sometimes. They also sometimes have the correct number of wings. So
Excellent. We love to see it. And Vela.
Okay. My favorite trans story is not a book either. I think that's allowed. It's
Absolutely.
actually anything produced by Transplanar RPG, which is a all trans people of color led actual play channel. So TTRPGs. Um, and they tell stories in a non-colonial, anti-Orientalist multiverse where everybody is trans and shit gets dark. It is a dark fantasy channel, but there's always hope in the darkness. There is joy, a lot of it, and so many different expressions of transness and of identity, of disability, of interpersonal issues. Kind of going back to what Kara said in their introduction, the nuances and the good and bad portrayed in trans people is just does very, very nice things to my heart.
That's
So
amazing. Yeah, I have heard good things about them.
they
Um,
are incredible, and I will sing their praises all day long if I'm allowed.
I totally get that. There are definitely stories and groups I feel that way about, but we do have other questions. So, in the interest of not letting this panel get completely derailed, I will move on to our next question. We are actually moving on to a community question next. So, community questions are asked by our sustaining members who give a small monthly contribution to weeknight writers to help us continue doing our work and also to gain access to things like having their questions prioritized during panels and our pro Discord where we have write-ins and social sessions and a whole bunch of fun stuff. And we're actually having a social event in the Discord today from 4 to 6, which gives me exactly enough time to eat some lunch before I move on to that. So that's super cool, and you should definitely check it out. It was already linked in the chat. Uh, But yeah, this question is from Rebecca, and she says, I write a lot of historical fiction, and I love the idea of having inclusive characters no matter my story's timeline. Do you have any recommendations for how to inoffensively introduce trans characters when there might be less queer-friendly verbiage available? As in, people aren't using they, them pronouns, that kind of thing.
I can go first if no one else wants to jump in.
Go ahead.
Okay. Um, so I spent a lot of time thinking about this question. So I've got a lot to say. Please feel free to stop me if I go too long. I myself have never really had the patience to write historical fiction because every time I go to use a word, phrase, name, or whatever, I have to stop and go researching for what feels like forever. An example, I had to figure out whether someone would encounter wolves in the British Isles during the 18th century. The answer is no. Um, I think most historical writers can relate to the endless research, but unless you are trans or a linguist, a lot of authors and people in general remain uneducated on just how long trans people have existed on this planet and how vocabularies in different cultures and languages have represented them. Speaking specifically about the singular they them pronouns, in Mandarin, there is no distinction between the spoken or pinyin form of the male and female pronoun. They have one spelling, one pronunciation of it. It is ta. In Bahasa Indonesia, we also do not have gendered pronouns. We have one singular pronoun. It's dia, spelled exactly the same, pronounced exactly the same. But back to English, we do have gendered pronouns, he and she. And we also have the singular they. Singular they has been used since at least the 14th century, which is when the Oxford English Dictionary first recorded its usage. For context, that means that singular they has been in use since the beginning of the Renaissance period, which is a really long time. As far as gender or transgender and non-binary identities through human history, the best thing to do is research indigenous cultures, preferably ones who still keep their traditions despite being colonized. In South Sulawesi, the Buginese people have had five genders since pre-Islamic colonization. Those five genders are still part of their society today, despite an uptick in the 1950s in queer and trans hatred. But they're still alive, they still survive, they still thrive. And those five genders have existed for over 6 centuries, which is twice as long as the United States has existed. So, as historical fiction writers, a common problem that can arise is the Tiffany problem, where you can write something that is completely time period accurate, but because of how modern society thinks or has forgotten certain things, it sounds inaccurate. It sounds made up. So as a historical fiction author, it's up to you to figure out whether you are going to be historically accurate with regards to trans-inclusive vocabulary and cultures as you write your trans characters, or if it's more important to you that your readers not lose their immersion in your historical fiction story. And if the latter is the case, sitting down and asking yourself why that is and why you want to write trans characters in the first place, why that is important to you, is going to be a big step in helping you figure out how to make your story trans inclusive. Because I promise that whatever historical hiccup you're thinking of with writing your trans characters, it already has historical backing to help you stay accurate.
Well said.
May I go next?
Of course.
I kind of just want to piggyback off Felix because I'm a historical fiction writer. I write historical fantasy. And actually, at one of the things that you just mentioned, the fact that it is true, that is historically accurate. Um, when I wrote Kinship and Kindness, one of the things I actually did at the back was put a bibliography or sort of a works cited page because I knew so many people were going to be like, trans people didn't exist in the 1890s. And I have done a lot of research. So even if you go to more academic books, if you're looking at, things that are set in America, let's say in the 1890s or England in the same time period, because that's when I write. Um, I did a lot of research into trans history, and there's a lot being done right now. So, for example, Jen Mannion's book, Female Husbands, talks a lot about trans men in the 1800s and how um, you can find them pretty easily in historical records. And, sometimes you tend to find the things that end badly more often than you find the things that end well, because if it ends well, nobody knows for the most part, or the people who know, or the people who will keep you safe. So it's there. It's just not blatantly obvious. Something I find freeing, though, about writing historical trans characters is that because there aren't labels necessarily, there is more room for nuance and more room for discussion of gender and how it relates to um, sexuality and expression, and that things don't have to be so hemmed in as sometimes they are in the modern world. Um, like, for example, I consider myself to be agender, but I'm not genderless necessarily, and I know that's sort of contradictory. So I think sometimes not having those labels does allow a writer to create a very nuanced portrayal of someone without being sort of hemmed in by expectation. Um, at the same time, it's interesting because obviously the singular they has been used for centuries. And there are some famous they thems in history. For example, in the 1700s, there was a Quaker preacher named Public Universal Friend who wanted to be androgynous, told their followers that they were androgynous and to not be called he or she. So I'm assuming most people used they for them. Um, and I think when we look into history, we see a lot of people who were cross dressers, but who lived as a different gender or who vacillated back and forth. Um, and I think sometimes, like for my research, my last book, looking at mashers who were performers who were supposed to be women who dressed as men, and so many of them sort of sat in the center of gender, where they sort of were what we might be considering non-binary or even um, a butch lesbian, depending on how they looked at themselves. So I think you can find a lot of these things in history. Do they just don't they're just not called trans, or they're not called queer, or they're just considered to be someone who's a little odd in history, or someone who is, um, slightly outside the norm. So it is there. It's just not blatantly obvious. So if you're doing historical fiction, definitely do your research. And I think the verbiage is not nearly as important as the portrayal and the characters' own explanations of who they are.
Awesome. Vela, do you want to go next?
Sure. That is a tough act to follow on both parts. Um, oh God, what do I even say? Don't want to click that. Yeah, I don't really have that much more insightful things to say about it. I'm not a historical fiction author myself. My research relates mostly to how do I make other things inoffensive and how do I very gently broach topics that might be a bit out there for a general audience, like unconventional forms of love, where let's not go into it. It's fine. Um, I think maybe the one through line I can highlight in what Felix and Kara have said is the difference between like actually presenting something fully accurate and also playing with language and expectation and being a bit more experimental and not using labeling as much. I feel like when you're writing anything, whether that's historical or just science fiction fantasy, at some point you have to decide what you want to see in it and how much you're willing to step outside the accepted lines and the pre-drawn stuff, how much research you want to have fully accurate, and how much you just want that they them to be there. And I think that's okay, and you just shouldn't stop yourself from writing what you want to write if your research says, oh, this kind of person didn't exist back then. First of all, as Felix has demonstrated, absolutely did. As Kara has also demonstrated, if they did, maybe you don't know. So you can't just imagine. There's nothing wrong with that. You're not writing an encyclopedia. You're not trying to tell a autobiographical story or something, or just a biography of someone. You're not necessarily trying to represent reality as a whole in all its nuances. You're writing a story, and you're allowed to, blur the lines a little bit. That is the most I can contribute to that.
No, that's great.
I am
Georgina,
so
do you have
happy to be
anything to
here.
add?
I don't read historical romance, even though some of my favorite people write historical romance. I'm more contemporary, and if I'm doing fantasy, it's like contemporary paranormal fantasy because I'm very old school with that. But I do like you see that in historical spaces, the sort of idea that it was always white cis het, and in reality, especially when you talk about Europe, right? Like people get so upset, so upset that like I'm a like I'm gonna relate this to race for a second, right? Um, like I'm writing a Black Dracula, right? And he's centuries old, but he's an immigrant to Romania. So he has a Romanian accent and he's picked up Romanian culture. People have problems with that. And they have the same problem like this this person or this type of person cannot exist in this space because they have a very narrow view. And look, American history class is whack. We all know it's whack. They did not teach us nearly enough to navigate the world as it truly is. And so that goes back to that. But like I get a lot that this can't exist in this space. So you are wrong. And that it doesn't even does and it doesn't deserve to be there because it is wrong, which is highly illogical because it does even if it didn't exist, which it did, it does uh, diverse people deserve to show up in all spaces. Have never gotten that, and I actually have gotten that sort of feedback from people that they don't understand why Dracula is Black, why Dracula is Romanian, even though he's also a Nubian African immigrant. They don't understand like the intersections of race and ethnicity, and it's really frustrating to see that sort of mentality like fades into the trans space, right? They're telling us we can't exist here when we've always existed here. And that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, that's well said. And I find myself thinking of the one series about Alexander the Great that came out, and there were a whole bunch of people upset because it made Alexander the Great gay, which I thought was hilarious. And I thought it was even more hilarious when I actually saw the series on Netflix and I realized that it was actually a documentary. It's like I always knew Alexander the Gay, Alexander the Gay. You get what I'm saying? I always knew he was gay. And I figured, okay, this is, a fictional story that's, leaning into that. No, it was a little literal documentary and people were mad about it. And I mean, on the one hand, it's kind of infuriating, but when it's that blatant of a case, and especially like queer people have existed everywhere in all of history, but anyone who thinks that ancient Greece was only doing the straight thing is just they are lost. I mean, literally both lesbian and sapphic are words that came from an ancient Greek poet, Sappho. Um, yes, I appreciate in the comments, Alexander the Gay is how he will henceforth be known. Uh, yeah, so that was really great. And so this is kind of similar. This is actually a moderator question, and Um, I'm gonna give some contextual framing first, which is that in when we're talking about representing marginalized communities generally, one thing that you see a lot of people saying is that yes, having, one or two main characters who is in this identity is amazing and it should be part of what you consider, but you also need to consider having these people just in your world generally, showing them in the background, existing, knowing that there's, more than these two um characters of this marginalized identity in this universe. And so the question here is that possible to do with trans people, and how can we represent trans characters in as background characters if they're not using they them pronouns, which is sort of like a more obvious giveaway, and they are minor characters who might not actively discuss their gender with the POV characters of your story. Anyone want to go
I
first?
mean, I don't want to keep taking the first spot if someone else wants it, but I can go.
Oh, no one
All
else is
right.
volunteering, so
Sure. So There's a reason that there's a frequently repeated saying happening in the current trans rights conversations in the US and UK specifically. I'm not going to speak about the rest of the world. Is the we can always tell and the rebuttal you can't always tell. Um, and the we can always tell phrase is based on the stereotype that whatever physical characteristics that are attributed to the dominant hormones of your natural puberty and the genitals you were born with are never going to be unrecognizable, and they will always show what you were assigned at birth. Humans are incredibly diverse. Physical traits among just cis men or just cis women will differ so much, there's no way to completely isolate a characteristic to one group. And because of this, you cannot always tell. And in addition, specifically to this conversation, there's no one way to be trans, and therefore there's no foolproof way to figure out that someone is trans or to write a trans character in your stories. There's not going to be a 100% way to make that clear to your reader without bringing up that relationship to gender, whether that is referencing some kind of social or medical transition, or their role in society and their culture, or putting a pronouns pin on their clothing. So, if the goal of the author is just to sprinkle them in the background so that readers do know that they exist in the world, um, there has to be some other world building happening there. I referenced before that there are cultures with multiple genders, and genders outside of the modern Western male and female binary, that have existed since the beginning, right? They've always been there. So that's one thing to think of as an author with regards to your work is what cultures exist in your world and how do they view gender? And if this is like a historical fiction or a contemporary fiction, what real world cultures are you including? And have you researched their histories on gender? Because the reality is, if you're hoping to diversify your writing with trans characters and hoping to get by on the same techniques as having Black characters, Asian characters, disabled characters, queer in terms of sexuality, not gender characters, it's not going to work. It's simpler to reference the color of someone's skin or their cultural attire, or have a woman kiss her wife or hold her hand as ways to tell your reader that those identities exist. But there isn't a way to portray a trans person to your reader without using that cultural clue. So what is the purpose of this trans character in your work? Like aside from quick diversity, what do you want that trans characters to embody? And once you figured that out, it's going to be a lot easier for you to do your research or your world building to give your readers those context clues without trying to default to making your trans character clocky. That's the offensive one.
Yeah, that is a great answer. Does anyone have anything to add to that? Anything else to... Oh, let's go with Kara first.
So, I mean, that was pretty similar how I was going to respond is that like you really can't, when you're doing a trans character, there's no real one way to portray someone or to clock someone. I mean, there are little ways that you can sprinkle these things in with, someone being able to grow facial hair, or having to shave when, maybe their gender normally wouldn't, but still it's not normal. That's just, you know, statistically speaking, not that it's not common anyway. Um, even if you have someone discuss their vocal tone or their childhood and how maybe they seem to be a different gender than they were when they were a kid. I mean, there's some ways to throw these things in there that aren't blatantly obvious. And I'm thinking from a historical fiction perspective because that's what I write. So if any of this seems a little like old, that's why. Um, and what I will say though is that I have written characters who are side characters. I thought when I wrote it, I was like, this is blatantly obvious that these characters are trans. And I've had readers completely not clock it and be really confused later on. So, like, I have a character who is a trans woman who has a wife and they have a child together. And her wife is in a lavender relationship with one of the main characters of the story. They're just married as marriage of convenience. They're not together. They've not done anything together. And I flat out say, like he says, I did not help create my daughter. She's she was made by Agatha and Louisa, and still people did not clock the fact that Agatha is a trans woman. And, I think at some point you have to say to yourself, like, people are either going to get it or they're not. especially in historical fiction, you can't really be like, oh, well, I have to remember to take my shot today, or I have to make sure to take my, pills, or I'm wearing a trans pin or a trans, trans flag wristband or something. So if you're writing historical, don't sweat it too much because there are some people who are completely not going to clock it at all, despite your best bet. And, focus more on the character themselves and building who they are. And, being trans is part of their identity. But I don't think you have to try to just keep hammering it home, hoping people are going to get it. Sometimes less is more in that regard.
I really appreciate that, and especially the specific example that's very amusing, and it really shows how people will see what they want to see in your work, whether like you can't control how they are going to react to certain things. You can try to mitigate harm and try to make things clear as much as possible, but people are going to read whatever they want to read from your words. And that's just something that we have to acknowledge and live with as we are writing and, especially as we're publishing. People are going to get what they're going to get. Vela, you also had your hand up?
Yes. God, such eloquent answers. I feel a little out of place. Um, I think we're gonna return a lot to the people are going to see what they want to see, which is like one part of the answer I would have given. You can't you can't help people see stuff. You can only do your best and be like, hey, this would tell me. And some people are just not going to see what you want them to see. Some people are not going to understand coding of characters. Don't worry about that. Others are gonna get it. It's gonna be fine. Do as much or as little as you feel comfortable with. What Felix said about the you can always tell. That's also something I thought about, which was that let's say you're writing a setting where transness is not accepted, is not, you can't be openly out as being trans. There it gets a lot more difficult because if you're not telling your POV character a secret, then there's no way for them to know it other than other people spreading that secret around. And that's bad for obvious reasons. I don't think I have to lay that out. Um, but also with all the ways you can just be blatant about it, referencing medical or social transition. If you're writing a setting or a story where that is accepted, you can just go into that. You can make it, um, you can celebrate it rather than just hide it, which is one of the things I see a lot of people think about trans people, that we try to hide what we used to be and trying to just, vehemently go away from that. It's not true. Like every trans person I know, every trans mask person I know who has had top surgery is like, yeah, I love my scars. Every trans woman I know who takes, estrogen shots or anything, that's just a part of the routine and that's a normal thing, but it's also something they connect with other people over. It can just be something beautiful. Like you're taking care of your body or you're changing yourself in a way that helps other people see you better. There's many ways to just lean into that. I don't want to go into too much detail. Honestly, Felix and Kara have said so much already, just absolute wealths of knowledge.
Mhm.
Um, I had something in my head, but it's gone now. Hmm.
Tale as old as
Yeah.
time.
We'll have to let it go. Anyway, yeah, write what you want to see. Don't worry about how people are going to perceive it, and listen to Felix and Kara.
Excellent advice. Georgina.
Hey, right. Again, I keep reiterating, like I haven't said this 1,000 times, but I write contemporary, paranormal, and romance, basically. And for me, I'm such an out and loud, and I mean loud trans person, even though I don't fit the mold of what someone will think. Because when people see trans, when I say I am trans masked, they think of someone like Felix, right? Someone who presents as I like a man. He's a man, right? He presents as a man. He doesn't wear makeup a lot. He doesn't. or ever. I haven't seen him wear makeup. He has he, him pronouns. And so people have like a set vision of what trans is and what that label attached to that trans identity looks like. Because I've seen like feminine trans men who look like you will clock as a woman, and then they'll come to you and say, "Hey, my pronouns are he, him," and I'm like, "Oh," and so that informs how I like write trans characters. I just be like, okay, this person is trans because they may look this women, but like I'll actually in the narrative have like a character say, "Hey, what's your pronouns?" Blatantly ask pronouns, like because that needs to be normalized anyways. So like if they meet someone, "Hey, what's your pronouns?" And that sort of normalizes that. Hey, what you see is not necessarily what it is. And I think like just, you know, and oh my God, Vela said it better than I could. Like just throwing in like the details of what comes with living a trans life, you know, stating your pronouns or wearing a he, him or a pronoun pin or going through medical transition or having scars from that. Um, but like the biggest indicator, like in any of my stories, is the pronouns because everybody asks pronouns first and foremost, and so that's a huge indicator that what that person is or who that person is trans. And then I might add like some medical transition stuff, like I have a story in which like you can change your genitals through potions. Like you could take a potion and you want like you know uh I don't know what I can say because this is going on YouTube. So you can have different genitals or different mixes of genitals versus, you know, what potion you take that day. And if you forget that you took your potion, you kind of revert to the genitals that you were born with. And it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. It's just there. It's like you get up, you take your medicine for your like mental illness or your chronic illness. It's just another part of that person's story. And I think a lot of people, when they're going into writing trans characters, they think they have to make a big deal out of it. Like, oh my God, it has to be like I have to wear the trans flag over my shoulder and make everybody know that I'm trans. And that's not how trans people live. We just, you know, we take our meds, we take our meds. We sometimes gotta save that money for that, you know, top surgery or that bottom surgery. And you know, we might have that in the link in our bio, and that's about it. We're just living our lives. And people seem to forget that trans people are just people trying to pay their bills and get their taxes in on time. That's it.
Awesome. Well said. And thanks for reminding everyone out there to take their meds. Our next question is an anonymous
I
community
think Vela
question.
wanted to say something.
Actually,
Oh,
real quick, if I could add to my thing that I was saying earlier, because Georgina talked about it and that reminded me of it. Um, One more thing about coding, when you're coding characters as trans, like in physicality, that I wanted to say, you can't just subvert stereotypes because, okay, I know all of us here probably read some amount of trans fiction and we've passed this, but if you read like a lot of cishet fiction, then it's always like men are the big, brutish, strong ones, and women are the small, dainty ones. Just take those like tropes and just mix and match them. Have a man be elegant, have a woman be broad-shouldered and violent. Good for her. You know? That it's not a foolproof characterization, but I think also it's gonna help you just like show people more as they are, and it's also just fun.
well
Like,
said.
yeah.
I do
Not
love
very,
my big
yeah.
violent woman.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention big violent women.
I accept that. Any excuse to write and mention big violent woman is a good excuse for me. But yeah, so this anonymous question is actually two questions that I kind of smushed together because they were very close to being the same question, just worded a little differently. How would you like to see yourself and also trans people generally represented in stories created by cis people? And what is an underrated trope you wish more authors would use with their trans characters? Vela?
Okay, I'm gonna take the first spot before Felix steals the spotlight again. Um, One trope I would like to see more, I don't know if this is a trope, but just trans people existing and in like joy. A lot of people who write about trans characters, I have made that mistake, have made like take steps to make it understandable or palatable or show the issues trans people go through to a cis audience. There are very valuable and very good stories where the issues of transness are being expressed. I mean, those are real world, real life issues. They need to exist. They are wonderful. But not every story wants to actually do that. You can tell when a story goes, oh, I have a trans character. I need to show how hard it is for them to get their surgeries or whatever. You don't need to do that. You can just show them living their life as a normal person. You can show them being good, being bad. You can show a world that doesn't actually care that they're trans, and there's still an evil king somewhere raising an undead horde to, I don't know, avenge their lover. The issues don't have to come from the transness itself. Also, let them transition into things other than people, let them be monsters, because trust me, believe me, if you talk to any trans person about monsters and werewolves, they're gonna go, yeah, it would be so cool to have claws and just be able to, jump real high. Just have fun with it. Don't feel constrained by societal expectations of what you're supposed to write. The trans misery trope, I think I would call it, should be done intentionally. Like if you want to portray, societal issues, do it very intentionally. Otherwise, you're just not gonna have fun, and it's also not going to really do what you want it to do. That's all I had to say.
Yeah, I really like that. Georgina, do you want to go next? You've gone last of the last
Yeah.
couple.
Um, I don't know if I should mention this because this is a professional forum, but I'm doing two things, right? I'm writing an agender Black vampire, and then I'm writing tr a trans witch, right? For fan fiction, and I'm not going to get into the name of the fan fiction, whatever. But what I found, like as I was learning to write trans people, because I have to learn how to write it, even though I am trans, because you know my experience is not everyone's experience, and the thing about the author community, the trans author community, is that I've learned so much of what about what it is to be trans, and that at the end of the day, transness can come in different forms, and those forms are valid, right? And so I've learned like I'm writing a masculine trans woman because people think like trans. I used to think, especially a lot of people used to think that being a trans woman meant that you're immediately super femme, right? You're super feminine into pinks and makeup and dresses, and not all trans women are like that. They're butch trans women walking around just being trans women who are butch. Hey. So I, I've learned by writing a butch trans woman that I can shake up gender roles even in this space, and that's fine. I think we need more of that in trans spaces of like not automatically thinking, hey, you have to be super masculine if you are a trans man, or you have to be like super masculine if you're trans mask. Because this is something I often get as a feminine trans mask person that I have, like people are like, you're just, I've gotten this a lot. You're a woman. And I'm like, no, I'm clearly not, even though I'm dressed in this way. And I think like people have such a narrowed minded view of what transness is. And I'm like, I love that we have things like Pose, right? And all these great trans works coming out, but it's just such a narrow scope of what transness is. And I would like to see like people expand it and to recognize like we do not like why would you expect a cis woman to stick to strict gender roles and while you expect trans women to stick to those same strict gender roles? It makes no sense, especially if you are already breaking out of what the typical like appearance of what gender is as trans, inherently as a trans person, if that makes it sense, because I'm all over the place right now.
That totally made sense. And was very well said. Also, everyone say hello to Mr. Mistopheles, our little interloper for the day. There had to be one. Uh, Kara, do you want to go next? Hi.
Sure. I think, my big thing with trans characters is that I'm in a T for T couple in real life. And, how my partner and I present are two totally different things. We're different flavors of trans. And I think part of it is I would like to see more T for T couples written because I think we tend, as queer people, we understand that we tend to flock together like penguins. We find each other. Um, and, besides that, I would also like to see, more intersectional trans people. The fact that I think a lot of times we think, oh, they can't be like autistic and trans because that would be like too much. And I'm sitting here like, and, that's common. And especially with autism, and neurodivergence in particular, just statistically, we tend to more often than not be trans people. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think with this, I would just love to see, more people who are chronically ill and still trans, people who maybe due to those chronic illnesses can't necessarily transition in the way that we expect them to, or can't, you know, aren't necessarily going to present as fully, masc or femme, depending on, where they are on the spectrum, or, being non-binary and still being clocked as something else, which drives me crazy in real life, but it is what it is. Um, I think just having more variety in terms of trans people and trans portrayals is really, really important because it is a spectrum, and so many of us are, you know, all along it. And, the fact that gender doesn't always stay stationary. I think a lot of times they think like, well, you've transitioned and like that's that. And I think over time, for some people, it does shift and it does change. And I think characters should be allowed to do that too, that they shouldn't just be, static. And that if things change over time or perceptions change or their feelings about gender change, it would be nice to see that portrayed in media as well.
Awesome. And Felix.
Yeah, so my answer is super basic. I I want to see happy, loved, and supported trans characters, especially from cis authors. I want to see them thriving. I want their parents, siblings, aunties, cousins, friends, teachers, whoever. I want them standing up for them and helping them live their best life. This part is get a little serious, but like in the same sense that I don't want to read a white author's story about black slaves or Japanese internment camps and like the associated trauma and misery there. I'm not too keen to read a cis author's story about a trans character being miserable and subjected to traumatic events. Like, I want feel-good characters. I want the trans joy. Your trans characters deserve just as much happiness and stability as your cis characters do.
Asking for me, a horror writer, does that mean I just shouldn't write trans
No,
characters?
they
Because
should
I make
all,
everyone
if you're
miserable.
killing everyone, go ahead.
As
They
long as we're
deserve a
killing them
good
equally,
death too.
right? No discrimination in death.
Exactly. All right. So we are about to get to our last community question, and then we'll move into audience questions. So if you are in the audience and you have a question, please do share it in the chat and just make sure that you start your message with question in caps lock so that we will be able to spot it very quickly. And so this final community question from Aaron, that is, it's actually almost the same as one of the community questions we have from Bex in the chat, which is what are some of the biggest mistakes people usually make and or the most harmful tropes people fall into when writing trans characters, and how do we avoid them? Georgina, yeah, I don't think you've gone first yet.
Um, I think when it comes to trans people, there's some people who like you must write a trans person this way in this form. But I think when you start by focusing on them as only as trans and not as people, like I make this I make this statement about Black people often, about Black characters. It's like you will make them Black first and then person later, when you should be person first and then that Blackness right behind it, right? You should always develop them as characters first and foremost. So they, what are they good at? What problems are like for me? Because romance writer, the emotional flaw plays a big part in what I do. So, was there big emotional flaw, and um, how does that inform how they move through the world? And I'm not saying like it's like writing a person of color is like the culture is going to form how they go through the world as well. So, but it's not all of who they are. They are a person first, and so people kind of lose sight more now than ever of the humanity of trans people. And so you have to put as much work, and I would say more work, into building that character as a 3D being going through the world, and then add in the trances. It's like adding spice, like your chicken. You got to have the chicken first, and then you got to throw in like the seasoning salt. Okay, so like they have to be people, fundamentally people, and people can be bad, they can be good, they can be morally gray, but at the end of the day, they are people. And just because they are trans, they are not less people. And I see a lot, especially people who I'm a mm, trigger warning for the wizard woman. You know who I'm talking about. Like she had a character that was just a villain with no personality, no motivation, you know, no personhood other than her transness, her transness. And that is something that you can, like, if you're not very, very careful and you're not doing this with intention, you can slip into it just like that. So you have to be very careful to make sure that you are keeping the humanity first and foremost, right? And I think playing into sort of like the tropes of you must be masculine if you're like a trans man, super masculine if you're a trans man, or you must be super feminine if you're a trans woman. And you have to realize that those are just like, you have to realize that you got to break yourself out of the gender track when writing any character, but especially trans characters, because trans people move through the world differently. And we're very, as Felix has said, we are a very diverse group of people, and how we express our transness is very different from person to person. And I will also say this, like, um, just you there's nothing in this world, you could do every bit of research you can, there's nothing in this world that will trump lived experience. So if you're going to get in this space, please, 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 I am begging you on bended knee, get a sensitivity reader, because a sensitivity reader will pick up things you won't even think about. And so, if you really wanted to write trans people with the respect that we are deserved, please get someone who has lived that experience and listen to them, because people will get a sensitivity reader and use them as a shield to do whatever they want, and not do the work they need to do. And you should always be, especially if you want trans people to read your books, you should be always prioritizing our safety. We should not have to fear. We should be able to give informed consent, and we shouldn't have to fear reading your book like a landmine. So, like, those are the things I really want cis people to think about and do as they move forward in this space.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And sort of as an addendum, Jade has messaged me in the private chat and is saying that sort of tropes are used to set up like a baseline for a character often. Like, you have like a healer type character, that kind of thing. So it's sort of what you're saying, is it fair to say, is kind of like uh the that those tropes should be used carefully, and around everything else around it that you build up is what is going to really matter to the characterization of the trans person. Awesome.
Yep.
Vela, you have something to add?
Okay, I so many clever opinions on this panel. I feel like I'm just summarizing everybody's thoughts, but again, going from what Georgina said about making them people. This is true with every character, whether you want to write a person of color or a disabled character or a trans character. You need to make them a person first. Every trans character that you write is going to be a sibling or a parent or a friend or somebody who lives in the world and has attachment to it that doesn't relate to their gender or how they present. They're gonna have things that are more important to them or less important. That's up to you. I would recommend writing a variety of trans characters. In fact, make everybody trans. It's just you should just do that. We have a policy of trans unless stated otherwise, and we like to follow through on that in our books. But for me, for instance, my transness is much less of an issue than the other disabilities I'm carrying around with me. That's more important, and that informs the way I interact with the world and people around me much more. And that's something you need to just keep in mind that, you can't just go, oh, this character is the trans one. You can do that if you really want to. It's not going to hit hard in every situation. You need to just bring variety in there, and you need to write a person first and what they want, what they need, the connections they have to others or don't have. And then you can go, yeah, this person is trans. I don't want to make it sound like sort of an afterthought. Georgina already said so much. Um, on the note of sensitivity readers, though, there is one good substitute for sensitivity readers, and it is just talk to trans people. Like, get to know them, not as a like resource that you can learn from, but just talk to them, make friends, give them money. We are just people. It's gonna just enrich your life a lot, I think. If you don't have any trans friends, get them. Make all of your friends trans. I can't say that. Anyway, that's all.
It's really funny because I have not intentionally made all of my friends trans, but a solid like 75% of my friends have come out as some variation of trans, mostly non-binary in the last few years, and I'm now apparently the token cis in my friend group by like complete accident. And it's pretty cool. I love all those people. So,
We do tend to flock together
yeah.
somehow.
Kara, any thoughts?
I'm talking from someone who reads a lot of like historical romance. One of the things that I hate as a trope that I see sometimes is sort of like the "you lied to me" trope that comes out a lot of times in like trans historical romance. I don't see it as much anymore, thank God. Um, but I used to see it, and I hate it. I really hate that. I think instead we need to go like the Mulan route, where we're like, oh, in both forms. I'm down. I wish more main characters or love interests reacted that way. I'd rather have them be sort of a surprise bisexual. then be turned off by the fact that this person is trans or have this sort of meltdown over that. It's a trope that I really, really don't like. And I think, if we have it more, because sometimes you see that with like masquerade style stories where this character is sort of playing two different genders back and forth, um, ultimately because they are trans and they are trying to sort of figure out where they're going and how to sort of achieve what they want to achieve. But I much prefer when the other character has sort of figured it out ahead of time or is starting to get an inkling, and then when they find out, they're like, oh, nice, sweet, okay. So person I liked before is also this person I like now, so the same person. It's almost like why choose, but it's the same person. Um, I would like to see that trope sort of play out like that instead of, the meltdown over lying, because I don't think anyone who's trans should be treated as lying for coming out or for not telling someone sooner until they feel safe, etc. Um, but yeah, that's kind of the big, I went very literal with this question. It's kind of the big trope that I really, really dislike. But luckily it seems to be dying at least, but I think it can be made more fun and interesting in that regard.
Yeah, I love the idea of a love triangle, but actually both the love interests are the same person, just like on other sides of like their gender spectrum. That could be a lot of fun.
I really want to read that.
Yes. Felix, anything to add?
I feel like I went a completely different direction than everyone else with mine. Um, so kind of back to what I said with the previous one, like how I want to be or how I want to see trans characters portrayed. Um, I'm, as I said, uncomfortable with like using only the negative sides of a trans experience of the trans experience, for like the trans character's entire identity. And one specific example would be like the angry trans person who aggressively like attacks or corrects anyone's misgendering of themselves, regardless of if it was like a mistake or hostile in nature. Like obviously there are a lot of people, trans people, who stick up for themselves, and they should. I love that for them. In my personal experience, however, and a lot of the trans people that I know and have been in community with, were very hesitant to correct anyone, especially in public, especially a stranger. um, I personally feel like immense fear anytime I'm misgendered in public. So the last thing I'm going to do is correct anyone. If a stranger calls me ma'am, I just won't say anything about it. So like in terms of how you take that with your trans characters, um, I don't think you should just have your trans character be misgendered constantly and be miserable about it, and that's it. One thing I would love to see instead of that is like have someone else stick up for them. We love a supportive and proactive ally. Another way to avoid this is to have like whoever accidentally misgenders the trans character realize it on their own, correct themselves, move on. One of the things that I think happens way too often in real life and also in fiction is that the cis person or the cis character centers themselves in the trans experience, in the negative trans experience. Um, I see this all the time with cis people when they make a mistake, when they misgender someone. We all make mistakes. Apologize, move on. Like I don't want to read a multi-page long conversation in which a cis character loudly laments how terrible they feel about misgendering the trans character, how great of an ally they are, how they would have never knowingly misgendered someone. It's so hard for them to remember though, and we got to give them space to like learn and remember. It's just really hard. Like it's annoying. It's annoying in real life. It's annoying in fiction. It's centering the cis person. So, you know, that when I see that in a book, that just shows me how the cis author acts in real life. It feels very performative. It feels like you're not doing it respectfully or with the intention of inclusivity.
Awesome. I love that. And I always appreciate you taking time in different uh taking things in a different direction. There I go, tripping over my words. Um, let's see. What is the guess we got one,
Do you want me to
two,
start with the
three.
chat questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you want to jump into
So
the rest of the chat questions. I actually have to go to the bathroom, so I will leave you in Jade's capable hands.
All good. Okay, so from the chat, Shagara has a question that says, there's a lot of talk about they, them, and she, her, or she, he, but I'm curious how you go about writing neo pronouns into your stories, or if you haven't already, if you're thinking about it and how you feel about them. I just want to add a little addendum to this question of my own to that was kind of inspired by what Felix had said earlier. How much does language and culture kind of influence the existence, use, and need for pronouns or neopronouns kind of within trans culture? Or is this a combined effect, and how much of this can or needs to be part of the story? Anyone want to go first? Oh, Bela.
That is my lovely partner who has sent that question in. So a very good addendum that I would like to answer as well. Um, I was thinking about what Felix said about the Chinese pronouns, the Mandarin pronouns. For instance, the thing that that there is no differentiation in the written form, which was true until about like I think 30 years ago. I'm not quite sure anymore, but some person decided, you know what? No, we need to lean more into gendered shit for some reason and change how it's written, which is language evolves for many reasons. I think some evolutions are just not necessary. Um, I was thinking specifically about neopronouns with this question, though, because there is a very clever thread I read the other day. I don't remember who by. I have some memory problems about how neopronouns in written form can be more important than in spoken form. So while we might not hear a lot of neopronouns in spoken form, when you write them down, they express a sort of different characterization, I guess, of your gender, of your presentation, of your outward appearance to the world. How that is going to be perceived depends on the person who hears them. But you being there or the character that is being written there, having those neopronouns is going to slowly affect how like what people associate with these kinds of pronouns. And that doesn't have to be like oh yeah, the person who uses z, them with an X needs to be, you know, non-binary but masculine leaning or something. It doesn't have to be so clear cut. It can get very muddled and muddy and different because that's the part of the human experience. In terms of how you use them, just write them into the story. Humans, anyone who can learn language has the pattern recognition skills to go, oh yeah, these are the pronouns used in this way, in this order. And there are going to be people who are going to complain, ignore them. Um, I think that's the most I had to say about it, unless I missed part of the question. As I mentioned, memory problems. It's a thing.
No, that's okay. I think you covered it. Anyone else want to add to that? Felix, I see you responded in the chat.
Oh, yes, sorry. I did want to yeah, with Vela, there is a written difference in the Zhongwen version, which is like what you would when you think of like Chinese characters and it looks like a picture. That there is a difference. In the Pinyin version, which is the like romanization of it, it's exactly the same, and the way you pronounce it is exactly the same. But there is, unfortunately, a difference in Zhongwen. Um, I also like what Vela said though about just putting the pronouns in there. That's what I do. I just you're gonna figure it out. Like as the reader, you're gonna figure out that those are pronouns. You're gonna associate that with that person. As long as maybe if you're worried about people getting too confused about it, maybe ease into having only like one neopronoun character in a scene with people at a time, just to like get your readers familiar with it, get them used to it. But like just put them in there. It's gonna be fine.
I mean, honestly, what Vela was saying is very true. Like Cameron Hurley, if anyone's read, tends to use a lot of neopronouns, and it's pattern recognition. You know what's going on. Oh, Vela, you wanted to add something? Oh, you're
I
still
have,
muted.
yeah, I
There
have
you
only one more thing to add real quick, because I just remembered this part of the question. How does language play into it? Again, since we're on Mandarin, let's just stay there. One of the things that I have started learning from Transplaner, because I'm like that. The head of the channel, I'm gonna say, is Chinese, and has started using Chinese pronouns, Mandarin pronouns, as neopronouns, which is also like
go.
if you use, I'm not Chinese myself, I'm not in that conversation. All I know is that a lot of people have started using them as neopronouns to basically show their connection to a language or nationality. Um, you can also do that and just have it be visible that this character is, part of a certain, ethnicity or nationality or speaks a certain language. You can play with that. There's no hard and fast rules. Have fun.
Awesome. Thanks. Um, Kara?
Sorry, I lost my pointer for a second there.
You're
Um,
good.
something I think like I don't use neopronouns much in my own current series right now because I'm writing like the 1800s, so they weren't like a thing at that point. But I have a fantasy story that's been sort of marinating in the background for a while, and I think sometimes it can be really interesting to use them in terms of almost I don't want to say like a caste system, but like when you talk about people who might be, let's say, involved in divinity of some sort or involved in with the gods, goddesses, monks, things like that. People who are supposed to be sort of set apart from sort of the common people. I think sometimes using neopronouns can be a very interesting way to sort of show that difference and to sort of say like to make it very obvious that no matter how this person is presenting, their gender is divine or their gender is monk, so to speak. I know that Ningbo doesn't use neopronouns, but has used they for like the monks that are in the Singing Hills cycle. And I often think that using neopronouns would also be a good way to sort of show this person is not of the culture or of the normal group, and that by using them, they're sort of apart. And it's kind of just an easy clue in. Um, since I don't use them much, I don't have a whole lot to say in that regard because I don't want to step on toes for people who know more than I do. But I say if you want to use them. Just make sure you're being consistent with the forms of them. You know, make sure you're conjugating them correctly and that that's sort of clear and not using two that look similar that maybe are not quite the same, but get muddled when people don't know. Um, but I say use them. Yeah, if you're interested, do it.
Also,
Awesome.
pro tip, if you're working with editors, especially proofreaders who might not be familiar with the neopronouns, make sure you send them a list of the pronouns and how to conjugate them so they know what to watch out for. As a fantasy writer, I also send a list of like all my weirdly spelled fantasy
Original
words.
words.
Makes it so much easier for your proofreader.
Really does. Georgina, anything to add to that question?
So from I always trip over pronouns, even though I'm like, I am they them. But like my best friend Tress has kit, kitsum, kit kit, kitsum, I think it is like the pronouns they have or the kid has. And I'm always stumbling over it, but I think just practicing saying it out loud can work when you were like you're writing it out because like I'm I have to have it like the way that I learn things is not only can I write I need to write it down I have to like hear it in my brain and then see I have to have all three forms of learning and so I think like just getting used to it over and over again and I stumble over pronouns and names and like misspell it's a mess all right God bless my editor I misgender myself sometimes. I check myself. So like I think don't get too hard. Like you make a mistake. It's okay. But like I love the thought of just giving them like a list of like the characters and their pronouns right next to it. I think I'm gonna do that with my because like
As
a
an
new book
editor, I
coming
would
out.
love
So
that.
yeah. I think I'm actually going to do that for the next thing that I'm editing, having sent edit. But yeah, um, just get like say it out loud. And sometimes you don't know how to say it out loud
Mm.
because you're like, how do you say like kits and then kit self and or like zer and then you're kind of like glitching a little bit. But the more you say it, the more that you write it, the more you get used to it. And I truly believe that neo pronouns should be normalized. Like it should be like on an option, especially like if
Mm.
you're like because given as an option to like new when I was first coming out as non-binary, it wasn't really given to me as an option, right? It was just like you're they them and that's it, right? And so I like just because what we're doing as trans authors is that we're showing them what transness is. So a lot of people have no idea what the hell trans and non-binary and how to live through the world as a non-binary
Mm.
person looks like. And so I think
Mm.
by help normalizing it, that's going to be helpful for people who do need to find our books so they can like go on their own little gender journey. So I think that's important.
Okay, thanks. All right. So we do have three more questions. The next one, I don't want to spend a long time on it because the other two I feel like are going to be a lot longer of a discussion, but I do quickly want to go through it. So Shriek has asked, what are harmful terms and phrases to avoid, specifically when writing spice or not safe for work scenes that are including trans characters? Ooh, anyone want to start with that? Oh, Kara.
As we said before, I think, every trans person is different. So I feel like for a lot of people, they'll be like, oh, you can't say this or you can't say that, or people don't call themselves that or don't talk about their genitals that way. And I think it's different for every single person. You know, um, there was a whole discussion on one of the discords I'm part of that, was it okay that that a trans man referred to their genitals as what they're actually, what they're medically, let's say, called, or the feminine form of what they're called? And people are like, well, it might be dysphoric for some people, but I go back to, is it dysphoric for the character?
Hmm.
Um, is the character finding it dysphoric? Because I think you have to go on a case by case basis with your characters. Would they find that dysphoric? Would they not? Are they okay with parts of their bodies? Are they not okay with other parts? And I think when you're writing trans characters, you do have to sort of build in how they feel about their bodies, how they feel about different parts of their bodies. And, you know, once again, no one is the same. And you can't just sort of blanket say, no, you can't talk about this thing, or you can't call it this, or you can't call it that. And once again, I think too, over time, as your feelings about yourself change, depending on if you're taking hormones or not, how you feel about your body, those feelings can change, those names for things can change, and that's totally fine. But I don't think there can be a blanket statement on what's okay to call what, who should be in what position, that sort of thing. I think you just have to go on a case by case basis and make sure it fits the character and fits how they feel about themselves.
Okay. Yeah. That just definitely goes back to the tropes and the whole we have to make people people first. Georgina.
On. I want to piggyback on what Kara said. I think I absolutely agree because the way that people feel about their own trans identities differs from person to person. I think when it comes to writing stuff like that, this is where trigger warnings and content warnings are going to be your best friend. I see it often a lot in trans books where a trans author will say, hey, I'm going to refer to the nether regions as a vajayjay, right? Or something like that, right? And you'll just list it there. And then the reader can make an informed decision if that's going to like trigger them or they're going to make them dysphoric. Um, but just content warnings and call it a good old day. Just call it a good because you can't please everybody. Like I have no problem. I'm a trans mask person. I have no problem calling my nether regions of a JJ. Some people who are trans mask like to call their stuff something differently. It's fine. It's all gravy. But you have to make sure that you are informing your reader before they get into that. Because like you never know what's going to trigger someone, what's going to make them feel dysphoric. So you just put the reader's safety especially since you're writing a trans person, the safety of your trans reader should come before anything else. So just do content warnings, call it a good old day.
All right. Vela, Felix, anything to add, or should we move to the next question?
Yeah, just real quick. Going off of what Georgina and Cara have already said. I love the trigger warnings, the content warnings thing. One thing I would caution against is don't have a content warning saying that there are trans people. We're not a trigger. So I would definitely make sure to phrase it as like the vocabulary being used, not that there are trans people. Watch out. Um, and
It's a
then
really important distinction.
yeah. And then yeah, as far as what verbiage you're going to use for genitals, I think what I would recommend is having the trans character say that
Mm.
first. Like, so especially if this is like a first getting dirty scene with someone, right? And the POV character is a cis person, I would let the trans character say what they have before the cis character uses that. That's yeah.
So name it themselves first.
Right. Like self-refer to their own genitals with with that vocabulary instead of having the cis person name it for them.
All
Does
right.
that, if
Excellent.
that makes sense?
Yeah.
I don't have anything to add to that. That was excellent, and I think that's covered everything.
All right.
Yeah.
Excellent. We'll move on to the next question then. Sarah Duran has asked, do you have any tips for writing a trans character in a YA novel where the gender identity plays a key role in coming of age journey? That's kind of a big question. Yeah, go ahead and start.
Okay, I'm gonna take this one. That is a very, maybe I'm making it too broad in my head, but
You can
oh,
pick whatever part you want to answer.
okay. A YA story, so younger characters, where the gender matters a lot. Um, I think
It's
we've
part of
already
identity.
mentioned, yeah, yeah. I think we've already mentioned a lot of things, about how to write trans characters, respectfully, how to write them well. Um, when it comes to YA, let's say we have a character who's just realized they're trans. I mentioned earlier that we're like more than our transness. When you first realize you're trans and you want to transition, it can very easily be the opposite case. Like that is all that matters. That is the only thing. And then like 2 or 3 years later, you go, whatever, I'm just gonna add some more pronouns. Um, I'm hmm. Again, it depends on whether you are in a setting where transness is encouraged or accepted, or
Mhm.
where it isn't, because that is going to change a lot, I think. I sometimes see trans authors writing stories where, transition is religiously supported, and the characters still have the same issues as if they was gate kept, which is informed probably by dysphoria and their own experience and the difficulty to imagine it better. As a very broad statement for writing a character just like realizing their transition and it being important, and especially if they are young and don't have as much social influence or power to get their stuff done, I'd say treat them with kindness. Have them have people who understand them or people who want to help and give them something nice, give them a little bit of that journey that they want.
Mhm.
Because otherwise, eventually somebody's going to read it and go, okay, this makes me absolutely miserable because this poor kid is fucking miserable. Sorry for dropping that F-bomb, but I think we're past the 15 minutes.
Oh, way past.
Yeah, it's a very broad topic,
Yeah,
but
it
yeah,
very much
again,
is.
talk to trans people and you are going to end up with a wealth of knowledge of things you can bring into that if you really want to, of how people think about their own transition, how at the start it can be frightening, and how you can be, you know, terrified that maybe you're not good enough to be something else than what you are, and how eventually all of your other issues that you're gonna have inevitably in your life start feeding into that and blending. Be kind to your characters, is all I'm saying. It's gonna be a lot. I know this is a very vague answer, but I'm sure somebody is going to give more succinct help.
All right. Anyone else want to add on to that?
I can try.
Please.
I do not write YA. I would not recommend any minor read my stories ever. But if I was reading a coming of age trans story, I would love to see like resources. Like,
Mm,
what would a young trans person in real life, what should their next steps be? I would love to see them look for a safe person they can come out to first and talk to. I would love to see them like doing some research, trying to find resources and help. I would love to see that instead of only the like, again, I say this so often. I don't want to see only the negative sides. So I would love something that like, yeah, is kind of like a how-to journey of
hmm,
where the trans character is going in their transition and coming of age and coming out. So
I love that. Yeah. Okay. Um, Kara Gina, Kara?
So going off sort of the opposite of Felix, just because I think for me, adolescence was sort of misery, just horrible.
I'll agree with
And
that.
so what I will say is, I don't have kids. I'm not involved in schooling for like high school or middle schoolers at this point. So I can't say how things have changed since, I was in school. But, it's weird because there are places where gender is very sneaky and very blatantly sort of black and white. And I think as a non-binary person, it hit me particularly hard, dysphoria in very, very weird ways. Like for instance, when I was in high school, we had a project where we had to make a fake wedding, and I was sort of assigned the bride role, and I had like a mental meltdown over it. And it was, I think back now and I'm like, wow, that was really obviously dysphoria, but I was just having like a meltdown over having this role sort of foisted upon me in this class, which my teacher didn't intend to do anything, but I think, kind of looking into those sneaky ways that, gender, especially sort of the black and whiteness of
Mhm,
gender, the very binariness of it, especially for kids, um, how that can affect you. The fact that sometimes they'll split groups up into the boys and girls only. If your school only
mm,
has a girls team or a
mhm,
boys team. For instance, I'm a college professor. I have a non-binary student who's on the women's bowling team, and I constantly think there's no non-binary team for anything.
mhm,
And sort of how you get sort of shunted into one or the other, even if you're neither or both, and how that sort of sneaks up on you. Because I don't think schools, even now, are still sort of prepared to deal with students who are outside the binary. Where do you fall? They just sort of stick you in whatever you look closest to or whoever you're hanging out with the most.
mhm,
Um, so I think maybe going into that sometimes in young adult fiction can be very helpful because I
mhm,
think, it's still an issue probably. I would think it's still an issue at this point because I don't think schools know really how to cope with that. So, as much as I hate misery, I do like reality sometimes. And I think sometimes bringing those things up is very relatable for a lot of people.
Georgina?
Oh, like because all the good stuff has already been said. Like Felix basically, like my favorite book is Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. I love him. I adore him. But it was very hard, especially if you're like trans mask or a trans man. It was a very hard read, right? It was just because no one understood the main character's like transition or like journey, and constantly being misgendered, constantly dead named. And so I would like especially YA, and everyone has, I'm just doubling down on what everyone else says, to have safe spaces where they could just be who they are without question. Having mentors that just like, hey, my pronouns are this and this and this, and the mentor being like, okay, let's go. You know, having joy, having safety, having feeling like I think a lot of people like young adults are not adults, right? But like they do have a lot of the same needs that adults have, children do, like especially teenagers. They want to be
Mhm.
loved, they want to be accepted, they want to feel beautiful. And I think that can be or needs to be more addressed in like not transition, transgender fiction towards teens, because I think we as authors tend to think that we exist in a vacuum, right? That nothing outside our computers matters. When in reality, you know, trans people are being hunted down like dogs in the street. There's like I live in Texas and they're talking about locking me up for being trans, like $2,000 fine and like no $10,000 fine and 2 years in prison for being trans. And I'm trying not to cry as I do this.
I'm so
To cry.
sorry.
And I think like the people I can fight this. I can get in the streets. I can call my representatives, but these trans kids are surrounded by people telling them they are wrong and they need a space where they can exist and be right. And so I think that's like what Felix said is more important now more than ever is trans joy, also trans wrath. So because I'm a dark romance writer. Let me bring myself right to the front, right to the mother effing front. I I want trans people to embrace the joy is important. The joy is so important, but also the wrath is just as important. The ability to be angry, to be dark and be and have that darkness not be like you can't be dark. You have to be happy and joyful all the time. The wrath is just as important as the joy, and to like um, like oh my god, like this is why I've been doing a lot of dark trans romance lately, because that that wrath empowers trans people, like the ability to be angry, because angry sometimes angry and spite being angry and spiteful that can get just as much done as the love, right? And I'm all for both in that duality. So giving teens like permission to be angry in peace is so important. But not just trans teens, but trans people everywhere. The ability, hey, you can, I can embrace this darkness. It's the Batman of it all. You can, like darkness is not a bad thing. You can embrace the darkness, and you can use that darkness to do good into the world. And I think trans people now more than ever should be encouraged to embrace both and especially trans teens because they are being there. There's no other way to say it. It's genocide. It's genocide. There's so many trans teens who won't see tomorrow, and I'm gonna cry about it because I'm gonna cry about it. They won't see tomorrow, and so I hope that with our books, not my books is for adults like Felix. I don't want no kids there. No,
Fair enough.
but like with Aiden Thomas's books and Sharon J. Zhao's books and like all of these trans and non-binary people and who are working in this space, I hope that they can find peace and hope to face another day in a world that hates them.
Yeah, so, so well said. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Georgina.
If if we have some time, can I add something real quick?
Sure.
Okay. Earlier when Kara brought up the like yeah, the actual real misery going through high school. I do not have a high schooler, but I have a bigender 6-year-old in kindergarten. Um, his life is really hard right now as a kindergartner, as a 6-year-old. Um,
It's so
and
unfair.
it's unfair. It really, and as a parent, it's terrifying. So yeah, we need this blend. We need to see the trans joy. We need to see the trans misery. And when I said before, like I don't want to only see the trans misery, right? But it's there. That's a reality. I want my kid to see himself represented fully in stories. He gets very angry, rightfully so. He gets very angry with what's going on at his school in regards to him and his gender. He gets really upset. And also, he has people trying to look out for him. He has people who are in, his court trying to help him. He has people doing things, providing help in this journey. And so that's what I want to see. I want to see the wholeness there. I want to see the misery, the anger, and the support. I want these kids, when they read this YA, to see the support as well. All of it.
Thank you. Yeah, we definitely need more of that.
I'd like to add one more thing, if I can, real quick,
Sure.
as a uh, well, kind of through line. Um, when you're writing for young adults, and this is something you want kids to read and you want to see them represented in their wrath, in their joy, in the darkness and hope, feel free to be blatant about it. Feel free to have characters have that discussion with the kid in the book. You don't need to hide it. You don't need to shroud it or coach it in euphemisms. Sometimes people just need to know. If I'd known trans people exist, if somebody had told me you can just be a woman like 20 years ago, probably would be living quite a different life. Who knows? But
Fair
yeah,
enough.
just be blatant about it and yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so before I read the next question, just to be conscious of everyone's time, we kind of got another couple of questions a little last minute. Does everyone have an extra 15 minutes to finish those questions? Yes or no? A yes from Vela, yes from Georgina. Yeah, everyone's good? Okay, all right. So I'll just keep going then. Um, Eric asks, how might a fantasy author depict making a magical transition an option without it becoming a case of hand waving away trans people's experience? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Because I just again, fan fiction. Okay, so I like potions, them taking a potion, you know. Also, can you imagine the thing I love about fantasy is that you can imagine a world where transitioning is not painful. It doesn't make you you don't have to be a certain amount of healthy to transition. You could just add a wish and a swish and a potion. You can be whatever. And I like rituals, magical words is a great way. Just like them having it like a trigger word. Um sometimes like I when it comes to my languages, when it comes to fantasy, I have like a generator that's not AI, by the way, it's just a generator where it just like comes up like fictional languages, a Konglan, but like a trigger warning, I like a trigger warning, a trigger word where like like woman, and then one day you're a woman, and or man, or like clover or whatever, like a trigger word, and be you can be whatever appearance you want to be, or a potion, or a ritual is always good, especially if you're doing something dark, like you're doing a dark ritual, maybe sacrificing someone who deserves it, and you know, to get the like the gender presentation that you love and you want. Like, there's so many. Oh my God, I could be here all like Felix and Kara, who also do like fantasy, sci-fi. Like, come on, help me out. They're all day.
All right, Kara.
I mean, I am very much down for a potion, honestly. And I think sometimes you can even make it where maybe another character accidentally takes it and that character's having dysphoria. this like cis character who takes it and is suddenly like, oh my God, like no. And that sort of at least doesn't sort of hand wave away
Mhm.
transition and dysphoria and, not necessarily feeling like you're in the right
But
body. Because I
someone
think,
else could access that experience without,
yeah.
yeah, I like that.
And if you wanted to too, I think sometimes if your body is sort of morphing back and forth, you can still have that moment of like, oh, I
Mhm.
took my potion today and oh my God, my boobs hurt, something like that where it's, it still sort of pays homage to, you know, the medical transition we currently have. And I will say, as sort of someone who's non-binary who doesn't really go with either direction, I would love something that was just sort of a genderless potion. That'd be fabulous.
God, yes,
Um,
please.
because, you know, even now I think about if I was a kid and I was, if I realized I was non-binary as a child, I'm like, what option would I have? I would have to be on puberty blockers forever, which they won't do.
Exactly.
So, if that existed even in fantasy, I'd be like, hot damn, give me some of that as a reader. So I don't think you have to worry too much about like sort of hand waving away those experiences necessarily. I think, for most of us, the more accessible transition is, and if a character decides like, no, I don't really like this, or it was too much, then being able to sort of um, move back and forth until they're comfortable is even better, because
Grandma one halving it.
yeah, exactly.
Felix?
Yeah. So the hand waving away trans people's experience thing. Um, in terms of fantasy, I mean, like Georgina said, you can absolutely have a world where transitioning is just so normal that
You don't have to make a point of it.
you don't have to make a point of it. And also, like, when you think of the trans people's experience, right? Again, one of the things we think about the most is the misery, because there's a lot of it, is the hardship, is the dysphoria, the struggles. Um, and not to say that we should never portray that, but you can have just a sci-fi world or a fantasy world where those are not obstacles, you know, that is
Yeah.
just very normalized. I think I would love to see more of that in addition to, the realistic stuff. So, in terms of fantasy, I wouldn't I wouldn't worry too much about hand waving, more so being consistent. And Vela kind of touched on this a while ago too, is that, if you're in a setting where nothing is gate kept, it wouldn't make sense for your trans characters then to have these huge dilemmas, to have these mental hiccups as much, right? Because
It is
what
culturally determined,
it's culturally
partially.
determined that it's okay. It's
Yeah.
accessible. Everyone does it. Well, not everyone. Everyone does it, right?
Anyone who wants to
Everyone's
can do
trans.
it.
Yeah, so I think that's the more important thing to think of is not so much hand waving, but being consistent with your world building.
Excellent. Good points to remember. Anything to add, Vela?
Yes, a few small things. You can, as it was mentioned before, you can just substitute medical science for magical science. Instead
Which
of
we do all the time
surgeries,
already.
yeah, instead of surgeries, you have dark rituals using the blood of your enemies if you want to, if that's the story you want to write. Instead of hormone injections, you take potions. Instead of normal binders, you have magical silk binders that have like, just like, don't make your
You
fucking
never
ribs hurt.
pinch.
Yeah, stuff like that. But also, you can just, if it's a fantasy world, you need to keep in mind everything you're writing in a fantasy world, you're already making shit up. Even if you're using a fucking medieval European stuff as a setting, as a base setting. That's maybe not a good example because what I know about medicine in medieval Europe is embarrassing. But surgeries have existed for a long time, and you can just write, yeah, in like a lot of different cultures that you can just have trans characters. You can also make it more or less accessible if you want your character to have issues, or you can also have the transition be more socially difficult, not as in a like, even in a setting where it's completely accepted to be trans, it can still be difficult to build yourself an identity. Like
Yeah.
from starting to like when you're a teenager or a kid, it can be very hard to figure out your place in the world, whether that world is super accepting of
You
differences
can
or
have
not.
overbearing parents in any culture.
Yes, yes. In fact, my very trans accepting, very difference accepting series is basically Mommy Issues, the series. Because interpersonal issues between people are still going to remain. Your personal issues are going to remain. You can have transition troubles without having trouble to transition, is what I'm getting at.
Fair enough.
That's everything.
Okay. Um, in that case, Bex also asked, is there a trans identity that you feel is underrepresented? Short question,
Can
but
I
apparently
start?
difficult. Go ahead. Yeah.
I don't, okay. I'm just gonna, this is an assumption. I don't read enough books to make an educated guess, which for my standard would be absolutely all of them.
Fair enough.
I feel like more butch trans lesbians in general, or trans women in general, because people in real life are not fucking normal about trans women. It's such a big issue for us to exist. It's very annoying. Just have a couple more. In fact, make
Understandable.
best case scenario, just make everyone trans. Like you don't have to write anybody you don't want to write. I write very few men because I tried to be one for 20 years and it didn't work out. And I leave it to the professionals.
Fair enough.
But yeah, butch trans women, butch trans lesbians. Go with that. Very niche.
All right. I like it. Georgina, did you want to add something there?
Sorry,
Sure.
the pointer just disappeared.
Oh no.
Um, People with two different pronouns, because that's what I'm doing right now. I'm writing as someone with like she they pronouns. I'm not seeing that a lot, or he they. It's always like he him or they them. I like to see more of the mixing of the pronouns because like I'm not seeing that as much. Neopronouns, like people with neopronouns, is like as not being written a lot. So um yeah, I just like also like I want to just shout out Vela real quick because like I was talking about like the first time I ever saw a trans lesbian romance was since eight. Was like the Amanita and Nomi, right? As the only time I can even think of ever seeing that represented in visual form is a trans lesbian romance. And I think like I'm not I don't want to speak over you, so you can just scoot in whenever you want. But like the way that trans women, because I'm sapphic, I largely date women when I date at all. I normally I normally see it's just full of turds. I'm be honest with you. I'm full of like the worst turds. Like if you watch this eight, you know there's an actual scene where she like actually encounters a turf. Like I think it's the first three episodes. That's
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
regular. So I as many times I had to like gather a turf together in sapphic spaces is ridiculous. And so we need more trans lesbians in the sapphic space, just period. Bela,
Yeah.
what you got to say?
Um, you're so right, and yes, that was the I think the first episode. It was very much a hey, look at Nomi. She's so trans, and here's her issues with the TERF who calls her a gender colonizer and other things I will not repeat because they suck. And trans women and lesbians specifically get it really badly. I don't as much. I think I don't know why. I think people can somehow fucking smell that my skin is light. This is my first time like showing myself on camera since I transitioned, but a lot of the also trans misogyny intersects with racism as well. And then comes the
Mm,
ableism. It's just like,
all the isms get stacked
yeah,
then. They
yeah,
really
get
do.
stuck on the most acceptable target, which is not to say that, other trans people don't also have it fucking rough. Oh, but oh shit, do I see it a lot with trans women? It just happens so fucking often. I don't have a single friend who has not been harassed for fucking years. I'm sick and tired of it.
I mean,
I
quite
love trans
honestly, I
women
think
and I
the
love
harassment
lesbians,
of
so
women in general needs to end.
yeah, I mean, the thing you need to keep in mind when, like, if you're talking about transphobes is when people say, "Oh, they hate trans women because they hate men." You're buying into their lies. They hate trans women because they're women. They're an acceptable subset of women to attack, so don't let them. They fucking love men. The worse, the better. The more abusive, the better. They fucking love that shit. Write more trans women, write more lesbians, make everybody in your stories trans, then you don't have to worry about anything ever again. There you go.
There we go. The solution to all your writing problems right there. um, anyone else have anything to put on that before I go to the next question or not? Okay.
In advance, if you hear howling, my dogs think they should get fed, so ignore them.
All
Um,
good. We love the dogs.
yeah, they're rioting at this point. So if you hear howling and moose noises, it's them. Um, I mean, I said this earlier, but I would love to see more intersectional trans characters, like trans characters who are disabled, trans characters who are neurodivergent. I would just like to see more of that because, I'm chronically ill, I'm neurodivergent, and, sometimes you start to feel like you're too much because you're basically a bunch, you feel like you're a bunch of identities stacked on top of each other, when in reality, you're just a normal whole person. So I'd love to see more trans people who are not just able-bodied,
Mhm.
neurotypical, etc.
More
Um,
intersection. We love it.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Felix?
Yeah. So I would love to just see more diversity with trans characters. Like I want to see butch trans women. I want to see effeminate trans men. Like I want to see people who use multiple pronouns, even though their presentation might not look right, might not look like what you would think those pronouns go with. I know Georgina kind of said this like way back at the beginning about how they are often seen as just a woman because they are, dressed feminine. They have amazing makeup. Um, and how they mentioned that, instead of looking more like me, more like I just look like a man and I don't wear makeup. I wear makeup and dresses most of the time. I'm not dressed that way right now because I have found that it is nearly impossible for anyone to take me seriously as a man when I'm wearing makeup and dresses. I get ridiculed. It sucks. So I'm not presenting mask today because this is what I'm comfortable in. I'm presenting mask today to try and advocate for myself. So I would love to see more trans men, trans masks wearing makeup and dresses. I would love to see more trans women, trans femmes being butch as hell. I just love lesbians. Okay, I love butch lesbians. More of them. I want to see
Everybody likes
just
butch lesbians.
a lot of gender nonconformity. That's what I want to see more of. I feel like there's not enough of it.
I personally agree with you. All right. And we are going to move on to our final question. When building worlds and cultures that are trans-central, I imagine the discovery journey would look completely different than what it looks like in the world right now. So, what are some ways that you imagine acceptance and coming of age to be more positive, influential, and empowering as an experience for characters that live in trans-central cultures that you create, I assume? Well, I think everyone's thinking about that now. Oh, go
Can
ahead,
I
Bailey.
can I go? Um, I love that question. That's a very good question because I love writing also in non-colonial and anti-orientalist worlds, which part of that is, just making transness and differences accepted. One of the main ways that I approach that is by giving people a choice. Like it is normal for people to change their names. It is normal for people to decide on their gender and their appearance. But also, it's just societally, when you raise a child, they're gonna be raised pretty much genderless until they say, hey, I want to be that. And then when they're like 13, they have a ceremony called a name day where they, can choose their own name if they want to. It's not a requirement, but it's just a, like, hey, when your kid is 13 and they haven't said anything, maybe like just check in with them again if you've forgotten and you're really busy. Do that. Um, because it can still be difficult even when you have all the options to see where you fit in from a gender and even sexuality
Becoming a person and
experience.
building an identity is hard, regardless.
Yes, it is so hard. I have very big feelings about that, also related to disability and how that can change your identity and the ways you present and how what you do, because you might have different worldviews or different abilities, like physical or otherwise, than other people of the gender or sexuality that you want to be part of. You can still have very much the issues of actually coming out, though. Like one of our stories, the main character, who is named after Nomi from Sense8, uh, is had trouble realizing that she's trans because she lived in a place where she was kind of seen as a good omen. And so people were like, yeah, we're just gonna take whatever this kid has going on right now and we're gonna run with it because we are still a society of people and people are fucking flawed and we're just going to assume because none of us actually get to know this kid enough to really ask, which is horrible, but slightly made better through the fact that it wasn't like an active denial. It's still an issue that she has to deal with because she has to figure out who she is. She has to deal with the issues of like, I have been one thing my entire life, and now I've changed. And I feel so much better, but I'm still nervous about that. You can have the same issues as a contemporary trans person in different settings, and you can make it less hurtful. And one thing I would definitely recommend if you're doing a fantasy setting is definitely explore having transition just available, but also explore having it be tied into politics or religion if you want to do that. And having it be different from region to region. If you travel like a continent across, people are going to have developed differently. Language is going to be a bit different. Clothing, representation, like presentation of, who people are, how they move in that society, it's going to change. So just have fun with it.
As a person who loves world building, does their genius ideas. Hopefully, everyone enjoys them. Um, Anyone want to go next on this question? Kara?
As a sort of random aside, one of the things that my brain tends to go to with world building often is, it sounds weird, but like textiles and clothing. And
That's
sometimes I have
so
to
important, especially if you're autistic.
that probably
Sorry,
is
I
why.
am.
I hadn't thought about, yeah. And I didn't think about that, but yes, that's probably also why. Also just because I'm a nerd who really likes textile history. But it made me what Vela was saying made me think of, depending on what class you are,
Mhm.
what,
What you
you
can
know,
wear,
what you can wear exactly. And throughout
colors you
his
were restricted.
exactly, because so much throughout history was sort of gatekept in terms of what you were allowed to have,
Mhm.
whether it's based on money or status or recognition or what group you were part of. You weren't always able to have certain things or you had to wear certain clothes. So I often wonder if you're doing world building, even if it is, trans inclusive, how is that sort of affected by, class, role in society, um, what sort of is expected of you, and how those things might be different depending on sort of where you fall. Like, for instance, Ningvo's Singing Hills books, Chi is a monk who uses they them pronouns, all the monks do, but Chi still is fairly feminine in sort of how they're portrayed. Um, so they're not non-binary sort of by choice, they're non-binary by job. So
Hmm.
it's one of those things where you might think, you know, is the role sort of affecting it? Is it not? How is their outward presentation? Because, like, for instance, if I had to wear yellow all the time, I'd be very miserable, even if it was in clothes I wanted to, because I hate yellow. Sorry, yellow lovers, but it would
Okay, I
just be
also
something.
hate yellow.
It's just something that, in terms of textiles, would really annoy me, or being autistic, being stuck in a certain outfit that was making me feel itchy or constrained, or like the corset hatred that we see a lot in historical romances and stuff, I often think, as an autistic person, sometimes it's nice because you're being squeezed and that's sort of supportive. But if I'm stuck in it all the time and people are clocking me as feminine because of it, how is that going to sort of affect me and how I feel about myself and about my body? So I think the culture of your story and how clothes are and how textiles are made, what people are wearing, how those sort of affect you based on class, religion, group, etc. I think that's something definitely to think about and how that sort of intersects with gender and gender portrayal and expression as well.
Absolutely. Georgina, or did you already?
Yeah. I'm gonna be honest, I don't have a lot of thoughts on this because all of my stories are very much centered in the real world. And I don't, I'm gonna be honest, like the only time I read like hard fantasy is Chinese hard fantasy, like MDZS, which is they call them the Untamed books, but grandfather, yeah, MDZS or anything by any of the Chinese novels. I will read that and that's it. Or maybe Sharon J. Yao, and that's it. Like I don't do a lot of hard fantasy, but honestly, like if you want, like there's so many. Oh, who said about parenting? I think Vela said it about parenting. Like there's so many parents who have made the choice to raise their kid from birth as non-binary, and you should maybe take like a note from them. There's a lot of books out on this subject, YouTube videos of parents who are raising their kids in this way, and that will give you some great ideas on how to, especially if you're not doing hard fantasy, because I'm doing like my all my stuff is set in like a world within the real world, like
We need ideas for that too.
like like yeah, that I two things I'm just gonna take and spin off from Felix and from Vela. Take it, read about indigenous cultures who are already doing and have been doing it for centuries, because that's a really great place. As someone who has done a bit of scholarly research, although I am not a professor like Kara, make sure that you're getting from people who actually live that life or who are attached to them, to those particular indigenous cultures, because the way that people outside of indigenous cultures write about indigenous cultures is not always correct or right. So like
Very
make sure
true.
that you're checking sources. But like when it comes to stuff like that, you want like real life examples. Like check the people who are already doing and have been doing it. Because you're gonna find so much stuff and so much context that's gonna just enrich your book. So yeah, just if you're like, well, how do I make this applicable? Just who are already doing this, and then take what you can from that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Georgina. It's a great answer. Okay. Anyone else have anything else to add to that? Otherwise, I think we will begin our wrap up. Oh,
Yeah.
I
Bela,
I
one
have
more thing.
one more small thing. When you're already doing like transness and gender in a fantasy setting, keep that going because if people are different, then the world around them is going to be different. This is just me shamelessly just trying to push people to imagine better worlds.
No, but that's a
But
really good point. If you make a
yeah,
small change, you need to extrapolate that into the rest of
yeah.
your world. Otherwise, it won't be resonant,
Mhm.
like it won't ring true all the way
Yes.
through.
And you also absolutely should because it's fun. So if you
I
have
agree.
people who can transition however they want, maybe sexism is not as much of an issue.
Yeah.
Or maybe there's no as such like class system dominated by, men.
Yeah, patriarchy might
And
not be a
yeah,
thing.
yeah, and then you go on from that and go, what if would it be like if everybody just actually helped each other and like was nice to each other and shared resources? And oops, I've written proto-communism. That's my general experience. But yeah, don't just stop at gender and transness. Keep it going and try to imagine a world that you would want to see, is what I always go with.
Mm.
And you can just develop those ideas over time. My writing now is vastly different from how it was like 3 years ago. so much more unconstrained. I have like dual identities and trans people everywhere, and I don't feel like I have to justify it anymore. So have fun with it.
That is excellent advice for every facet of writing, honestly. Just have fun with it. Do put in the time and the care to make sure that you're doing things in a way that, doesn't hurt people or at least causes the minimum amount of harm possible because again, people are going to read whatever they're going to read into your stories. But there are steps that we can take to have better representation and to create better worlds. And on that note, thank you for everyone for staying this extra 15 minutes. Your answers have been incredible. I'm just gonna go around once more and have everyone just share where you can be found and repeat your name and maybe either your most recent or soonest upcoming publication, just so that folks can find you after this panel. Um, who wants to start? All right, Kara.
So my name is Kara Jorgensen. You can find my works at karajorgensen.com. I'm also available wide, so Kobo, Amazon, Barnes& Noble, Itch.io, etc. My most recent series is the reanimate. Well, the first book in my most recent series is the Reanimator's Heart, which has an autistic necromancer and his undead partner solving crimes in 1890s New York, which is magical. And lots of characters are queer in that story. Lots of side characters. That's where the trans woman who was mentioned earlier is from. So if you're interested in my books and you like historical fiction with lots of queer people, I would definitely suggest hitting up the Reanimator's Heart.
Georgina?
I have oh God. First and foremost is my ongoing episodic serial, A Vicious Thirst, which is a agender Dracula who's also Black and badass, which we love. I also have a Die Hard inspired romance coming up in July because it's going to be Christmas in July, and Die Hard is a Christmas movie. Do not fight me on this. So I have a Black Bruce Willis and his twinkish Korean sidekick. It's going to be fun. And that's the two biggest things. You can find everything at georginakirsten.com or Georgina Kirsten slash about dash me.com. The links are in the thingy, in the thingy. And yeah, just I'm so glad to be here with I actually made some new friends, and I with my old friends, my Felix. So me and Felix go back a while, and so does Kara. So I'm just happy to be here with my friends, and thank you so much for inviting me here.
Thank you for joining us. It's been wonderful. Felix, would you like to go next?
Yeah, my name is Felix Graves. You can find all of my work on my Linktree, which is, or sorry, let me start that over again. You can find me pretty much everywhere under the handle Auth Felix Graves. That's Auth, like the first part of author, AUTH Felix Graves. That is my Linktree. That is my Instagram, my Threads, Blue Sky, Twitter, even though I don't use that anymore. Um, Everywhere. Also Itch.io, I have most of my short stories are on Itch.io for either name your price or less than $2. I am also published wide, so you can find me on like books to read with all of the like universal links for my stuff. My latest release is a sapphic princess and bodyguard tragic romance that came out yesterday. It is The Princess and Her Shadow by Felix Graves. Um, it doesn't have a happy ending if you're looking for that, but it is, I've been told, very cute. My upcoming novel is The Killing Song, and that is a dark fantasy horror queer fairy pirates novel in which the pirates are trying to rescue the pirate captain's siren girlfriend from an internment camp, and end up killing a lot of fascists. So if that's your thing, you should look that up. Arc requests are live right now on Book Sirens. So yeah,
The only good fascist is a dead fascist.
yes.
Vela?
All right, my name is Vela Dinar. Uh, how does this go? You can find me on Blue Sky under the handle, what was it, Dragons and Sapphics, because I'm gay and I needed something. I write technically under the name of the Stardust Melody Collective with my loving partner. You can find all our works via the links on our website that has been pasted in chat or on through the links on that Blue Sky account. Um, Best place to get our stuff is itch.io because you can get DRM free files of our books. And also if there's any, censorship going on, you can just have them then. So you don't need to worry about Amazon just restricting your access to it. We write hopeful, dark fantasy, so it's gonna have a happy ending, but it's not gonna be nice in the meantime. We write about lesbians and our like mainly and our upcoming releases are technically two re-releases of The Gift of Blood, which is a cannibalistic lesbian vampire battle buddies, and She Who Earned Her Wings, which is also kind of cannibalistic, but polyamorous lesbian dragons. Yeah, that's it. That's all I have to say. I love lesbians.
All right, and Jade.
I'm sorry, I was in the chat. Please repeat the question.
Just let people know where they can find you.
Oh, yes. Eclipsewordsmithing.com is really my editing website, and I am Jade Wolf, but the O is a Y on Instagram, and that's really all I use.
All right. Jade is a great editor, and has been massive help co-organizing Weeknight Writer stuff. And yeah, I am Diana Gunn. I am the founder of Weeknight Writers, and I am also a dark fantasy author who dabbles in horror and very occasionally sci-fi. I do have my own website, authordianagunn.com, but what I'd really love if you are going to be checking things out after this is for you to check out the Weeknight Writers Ko-fi memberships. We have sustaining monthly memberships where you can do things like gain access to all of our paid events in the future and also gain access to our Discord where we have body doubling sessions, nightly check-ins, monthly socials, including one starting in a little over half an hour, and just generally amazing stuff. So yeah, go check it out. And thanks again to everyone who came, both to our amazing panelists for having such wonderful insights and sharing them, and to all of our audience who also had incredible questions. And this was just an amazing conversation.
I feel like I've learned so much. I need to go read everyone's books immediately.
I feel like
Absolutely.
I've also learned just so much. Thank you very much for having me.